Welcome to another live episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, everyone. Let's see, curiosity, creativity, leadership, they are necessarily connected. And today we'll make some of those connections for you. We're so glad that you're here for this live episode of the podcast. If you're listening later, you can get all future live episodes and therefore interact with us and see them sooner. Like this episode's not coming out on the podcast till February. So this is like insider stuff. You can do all that by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to do that. And if you're here with us live, just imagine you're joining us for a cup of coffee or tea, if you're me. And so share your questions, your comments, your ideas. They'll make for a better conversation, a better episode of the podcast eventually. So today's episode is brought to you by Remarkable Masterclasses. Each month, we release a new skill in an advanced masterclass format designed to help you become the remarkable leader and human you were born to be. Details on how to get on board for a specific skill or to get discounts each month can be found at remarkablemasterclass.com. So now I'm going to bring in my guest today, and now you can see her. And there she is, Sarah Stein Greenberg. Let me introduce you to her. Sarah Stein Greenberg is the executive director of the Stanford D School. She leads a community of designers, faculty, and other innovative thinkers who help people unlock their creative abilities and apply them to the world. She speaks regularly at universities and global conferences on design, business, and education, and is the author of the new book, Creative Acts for Curious People. She holds an MBA from Stanford's Graduate School of Business and a BA in history from Oberlin College. She serves as a trustee for the global conservation organization RARE, and right now she is our guest. Sarah, welcome. So glad to have you.
Kevin, thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I am excited to have you. I told Lisa, our fabulous producer, when we got this book, I just told you this before we started, but no one else knows yet, that this is not a normal book for our podcast, but this is very much a Kevin book. And so I decided that we should have you on. And as I got into the book, and you can see there's already markings up here, that I'm so glad that you're here, Sarah. So thanks for being here. For all of you that are watching live, if you have questions, you have comments, you want to just say hi to Sarah, you can do that. If you want to tell us where you're watching from, please do that. I can see all of your comments right here in our magical tool, and whether you're on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook. And so I'm just excited that you're here. So there was one thing, Sarah, in your intro that is something that you know that not everyone might know. So we should start here. What is D School?
Well, that is a great place to start because it's a little bit odd and unconventional. The D School is an institute at Stanford that is, we're part of the School of Engineering. We are housed within that part of campus, but we are open for business for students from all over the university. So we have students from the medical school and students from the business school and students who are studying public policy or human biology. And those students come together. We put them on interdisciplinary teams where they have to work across these differences and really find a common language for how to navigate these very interesting challenges that we throw at them. So we might be teaching a class on reimagining the financial system after a town or a community has had a natural disaster like a fire. Or we might be teaching a class where the students are working with parents and nurses and doctors who are caretakers for infants who are born premature or who have pediatric issues. So interesting design opportunities where the students get to really interact with the people who know the most about the experience or the challenges that are at hand, and then design solutions, design ways to improve the experiences or the services that they're receiving. And it is a very vibrant place. It is full of stuff. We're always building and making and experimenting. And it is just a wonderful creative community to be part of.
Okay, so the question that I wrote that I could put up here, I'm not going to put up here. I asked it. I'm going to ask it somewhat tongue in cheek because I think I know your answer. And so, but okay, why would I go to D School? I'm not a designer.
Well, it's so interesting. So design has really been evolving rapidly in the past couple of decades. And, even when I started at the D School, which now is almost 15 years ago, people were still, kind of calling us up and saying like, oh, do you do interior design or graphic design? Like, more about the aesthetic qualities of objects around us. And those are both important parts of the broader world of design. But the way that we think about design is it is a very flexible set of tools and methods that designers of all kinds of things have been practicing intuitively for 100 years. But actually, all of us can use some of those ways that designers work to be able to tackle tough challenges more creatively. So ways of noticing the opportunities around you that are different and help you get kind of below the obvious, or ways of really tuning into the human needs that are present in any kind of situation or ecosystem. Ways of translating your early ideas into rough prototypes and building models so that you can better get feedback from them, from the end user or from your teammates much more rapidly, and kind of de-risk the creative process that you're working on. So many tools that we can borrow, no matter if we have a background in design, or even if you think of yourself as a creative person, design can offer some tools that can help you express your creative abilities.
Okay, you just said in that long conversation, which was great, thank you. You just said a word that I want you to expand on. You might not even know you said it, or it might have been very intentional. I don't know. You said the word de-risk. Talk about de-risk.
Well, a lot of what's challenging about trying to come up with some solution that is innovative or creative is that you just don't know what's going to happen. If you are truly coming up with something that's novel, you might be introducing something new into the market or the ecosystem where you're working, and there might not be a lot of precedent for doing that. And actually, a lot of people tend to be quite risk averse and kind of hold back on, especially in large organizations. You have to get over that hurdle of, it's hard to predict what might happen if you offer something that's truly new or truly innovative. So being able to have some ways to test your ideas early and get real feedback is one of the ways that you can de-risk putting something new out into the world. So the way that our students are taught, not only are you trying to understand the needs of the stakeholders that you're designing for, which is one way that you can make sure you're getting closer to a real need. You're designing for a real need, not just something that you've imagined might be a need, but then you're going to iteratively test. So you're going to put those, very low resolution first stage prototypes right back into the hands of the people you might have been interviewing or observing. And they're going to be the ones to help you understand, are you on the right track? Do you have a compelling solution that's kind of underway? And those are some of the techniques that we use to ultimately, like if you want to fail as early in the process as you can, so that you're when the cost of an error is much lower. And that's one of the things that we talk about in terms of de-risking.
Yeah, I love that idea of low resolution, right? Like it's like I used to, and as you were saying that, I was thinking about a phrase that I sometimes use that I realized as you were talking probably dates me, Sarah, because I was thinking about, I often talk about things being high fidelity, right? Which, hi-fi, that's kind of like, I'm definitely dating myself. But the point is that there's a time and a place for high fidelity, time and a place for high resolution. There's a time and a place for low resolution, and I love that. I love that a lot. So how do you end up, tell us a little bit about your journey. How do you end up as the executive director of D School?
Lots of happy creative accidents, for sure. So I, as a kid, I was always somebody who, I liked to play with blocks and with Legos, and I was very imaginative. And I really kind of valued that kind of way that kids have of making up your own world. And I think a little piece of that really stuck with me as I traveled through, my education and my early career. I wound up working in healthcare, and then I decided that I wanted to go to business school because I had mostly been in the nonprofit world, and I really wanted to understand, how does the private sector approach the need that every organization has, which is to continue to change and evolve and meet new market demands and respond to changing conditions in the world. So I went to business school at Stanford, and I was just super lucky to have landed right at the moment that the D School was getting started. And I took some of the very early classes, primarily because I was attracted to that intersection of business and engineering and other fields. I always am interested in what can happen creatively when people are bringing together very different perspectives.
Right.
And, you know,
in your world, you might call it interdisciplinary, right? But I think for all of us, whether it's in our organization and we're thinking about that from the, you know, the various parts of our business or business units or disciplines, I think it's hugely valuable for us to think about.
Right. And, you know, you see this in like, you know, often in business, it's called cross-functional teams. But there's even, I mean, there's research that shows that just having relationships with people who are from different cultures than you are can also help spark some of your creative abilities. So difference is actually something to really be celebrated and incorporated into any kind of design work or any kind of group creative process. But anyway, so I just had the incredible luck to be right at the beginning of the D School, and it really changed my trajectory. It was, you know, I didn't come with a you know, formal design background. But all of a sudden, I was in the midst of this community of faculty and students who were really attracted to messy, complex problems without, you know, one right answer. And if you look around, those are all of the kinds of problems that most of us are trying to solve today, right? With very little precedent. And so I really grew to see that refining your skills in design is a way that you can kind of be prepared to face any kind of problem that you're going to face in the future, even as the world continues to change and to shift. And that felt very powerful to me. So that, I mean, that was really the initial reason that I was so deeply attracted to the D School and why I've stuck around for so long.
Well, there you go. That's a good answer. And was some other really good stuff there for all of us. So you are now, I'm going to say you are a designer, right? So you wrote/designed this book, and it's a unique book. I mean, if you've got the word creative and the word curious both in the title, we probably ought to expect something not dull. At least I would come to expect something not dull, and which it is not. But it's a very unique book. So talk to me about the design of the book and what you, to use the language in the conversation we've been having. What was the problem you were trying to solve through the design of this book?
Yeah, great question. And I will say, like, if you're ever reading a book about creativity and you find it dull, like there might be something wrong there.
Get it out of here.
Yeah, exactly. That might not be what you're looking for. So, you know, I was really trying to solve the challenge that are so many interesting and valuable techniques and methods that we're teaching all the time at the D School. And actually a really small fraction of that has been shared publicly. And I really wanted to spend the time to gather and curate some of, you know, the favorite and most powerful methods that we teach, and then present them to readers all over the world in a way that would be really accessible and hopefully really useful to equip people to solve the kinds of problems that they're facing in their companies, in their communities, even at home. So I spent a couple of years actually collecting all of these amazing ideas for what might go in the book. And there's everything in here from, you know, as I was saying, like the skills of noticing things that are not obvious around you, to building rough prototypes. And then even in terms of, you know, what are ways that you can use to spark collaboration across a team that doesn't know each other very well, right? Or a team that has been working together for a long time and needs to tune up its way of working together. Really, really practical skills. But then in terms of the design of the book, I also wanted to try to capture how much fun it is to work in this way, how challenging it is. You know, we have, you know, real highs and lows in any kind of creative work, right? There's tension on your team sometimes where you're struggling with what is the need we're trying to solve for? How do we actually proceed in this kind of foggy zone? And I wanted that to really also come out, because this is, you know, it's very liberating to work in this way, but it's also a challenge. So throughout the book, there are hopefully these both entertaining and also, like, you know, really relatable stories and visuals that hopefully will just kind of like draw you right into the heart of what it feels like and is like to learn and to be at the D School.
So here's Kevin's endorsement of description of the book. And so the endorsement is go get a copy. I don't care what kind of work you do. You need a copy of this book. But the second thing I will say is that it reminds me, Sarah, a bit of, I have a lot of books on my shelf from my life. I mean, as a trainer and as an instructional designer, as a part of what I do. And so there are parts of it that reminds me of that, like exercises you can facilitate with a group. So if that's a world that you live in, man, you want this book. But it is a what I would call a pure book on creativity as well, because it has all sorts of exercises for us individually, right? For like you said, about focusing, about noticing, and about a lot of other things as well. So it's thought-provoking and extremely practical at the same time. So there's Kevin's recommendation. Go buy this book. Now, you want to refute any of that, Sarah?
I want to thank you so much for that incredibly beautiful description. Yeah. And, I really, I wanted the book to be useful if you are reading this alone and you are thinking about, developing your own creative abilities. I wanted this book to be useful if you're leading a team or you're leading a large company, and whether or not you find yourself in a profession that defines itself as creative, because my fundamental belief is that these skills are incredibly useful for just about anyone. So I hope that people respond to it in the same way that you have, in terms of it's really flexible. And I'll also say, I don't expect anybody to read it front to back. It's really meant to be a resource that you can dive into at various times and kind of get the boost that you're looking for based on what you're. I'm going to get to
that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm going to get to that point in a couple of minutes, because I want to. There's something I want to do to dive into the book and talk about that very design point. But before we do that, I want to ask, since the book does have the word curious in it, and I sort of teased at the start saying that we were going to make the connections here between curiosity, creativity, and leadership. How do we, other than using the stuff in the book, right? Like, that's the easy answer. But like, how can we extend our personal curiosity? What advice would you give to all of us, Sarah, about that?
I mean, I really will share that my own curiosity gets sparked by things that are new and things that are different from what I've experienced before. So for me, I get very stuck when I'm in a really rigid routine, and breaking that routine in some way is always a way that like helps spark my own personal curiosity. I find the same thing to be true at work. Like, if I am stuck in one way of thinking about something, which happens, even to the best of us, even those of us who work in very creative environments, I want to think about, how do I find something that is different than my daily context and go immerse in it for a day, or really allow myself to learn something that challenges how I'm viewing the situation. Maybe it's an analogous situation, or maybe it's completely different. But I think that idea of seeking things that are new or a little bit strange or a little bit different, not necessarily because you're going to borrow from them, but just because it helps you like interrupt those, very sort of like routine pathways in your brain, super, super helpful. And I'll give you an example of one of the assignments in the book, which I think really helps with this, is called the Derive. And on the Derive, you take maybe a half an hour, maybe an hour if you have time, and you take a walk through your neighborhood or through your city, and you notice things in a very particular way. You choose one quality to follow, and you let that be the guide for your walk. So, you might choose the color yellow. You walk up to one yellow object and you view it and you kind of take it in. Maybe you write some notes or make some pictures in a notebook. And then you find the next thing on your walk that you can see that's yellow, and you walk over there and you do the same thing. And after 30 minutes of doing this, your brain is actually perceiving things in your immediate area that you may have walked by for years and never noticed. And so it's not about trying to like go on a scavenger hunt for the color yellow. It's really about reminding your brain of what it feels like to uncover new opportunities and to see things in a different way. And noticing how many things are in your immediate environment that you've never actually taken in and observed before is a very powerful way to do that reset.
I'm trying to find this. And by the way, I just remembered why. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because no one else has the book right now besides you and I. She's got a fancy colored version. I do not have a colored version of the book, everybody, because I have the uncorrected proof. I have the book that came out before the book. So
That's
you're
right. You got
saying
the early special
mine was
version.
all colors. Well, now I'm going to have to buy another copy of the book. And I just realized that probably the reason high fidelity came back to me in my head was it's one of the exercises in here. High fidelity, low resolution. We're not going to go through the 81 greatest hits of D School, which is another way that you could describe this book, right? 81 different exercises or assignments. Some people might say assignments, but they are assignments in the context of D School, which is probably why you use that phrase, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you could think about them as little mini missions. You could think about
as
them
exercises,
as
missions, whatever you want to call them, right?
Yeah, that's
100%.
right.
So there's a piece at the so 81 things like where do I go? And you've already told us we can kind of like go where we want to go or whatever. But what you did was you gave us a section called the pathways, I think it's called, and assignments. Find your path. Here it is. Assignments. Find your path. And it's the first place I have one of my little notes here. Talk about that as a design principle, but really talk about it in terms of what are some of the paths, because people might be saying, hey, this is interesting, but I don't really know how this fits for me. I want us to talk about a couple of the paths, and I haven't told for all of the rest of you, I haven't told Sarah which ones yet, but just give everybody sort of a general sense of what some of these paths, give us some examples of what some of these pathways are.
Sure. Well, I'll give a few examples, and then I'll talk about the design principle behind this. So one of the examples is, the thing you would most expect in a book about creativity, which is come up with ideas, right? A lot of people sort of zero in on this as the essence of creativity, and it is a really important part. And so it's
the least interesting part of the book, everybody.
So there are, a whole set of assignments in here that are about coming up with ideas, but hopefully these are all practices you haven't seen before. There's a section, a cluster called Locate Your Own Voice, which is, again, if you're one of those people who's working more as an individual, finding inspiration, passion, and perspective. There's a section called Tell a Compelling Story, and all of the assignments that are about how do you bring to life your vision of what your new product or service are offering, or what the world is going to look like once your design lands, how you bring that to life. But then there's also things that I think are going to be quite useful for people who are leading teams or leading organizations, things around working well with others, building trust and courage and energy and joy. And then some of those, I think, skills that are really important for all of us who are thinking about creating or making new things, which is about how do you peer into the future? How do you actually get a sense of what the world might look like after you launch your new product or service or experience, and what some of the effects might be down the road? So there are so many different kind of ways into this very rich material. And the design principle there is nobody learns the same way as the person sitting next to them. Nobody is on exactly the same, in exactly the same moment in their creative journey. And far
trying
be it
to solve
from
the
me,
same problem, trying to
that's exactly right. So it was really important to me to bake that principle right into this book, which is you, as somebody who might be learning or stoking your own curiosity or creative abilities, you deserve the opportunity to navigate without me telling you, here's the mental model for creativity you should use, right? I'm very much in the camp of like, you have to kind of develop your own creative process and your own vocabulary and your way of thinking about how creativity works for you. These are a whole bunch of methods that you can use along the way towards that goal.
All right. So there are two of these pathways, one that I want to talk about briefly, one of which Sarah mentioned, one of which she did not. So not surprisingly, I thought we'd talk a little bit about the works well with others. So Sarah, here's the thing. Give us one of the assignments, or give us a preview, if you will, of one of the assignments in the work well with others section.
This is one of the hardest sections for me to narrow down to one favorite. And part of it is because so many of these, the core skills of having a team work effectively together in a creative way, it relies on psychological safety. It relies on trust. It relies on me knowing that if I kind of share my early half-baked idea, Kevin, you're going to build on it instead of shut it down, right? So those principles are at the heart of a lot of these assignments. So one of my favorites in here I literally called it favorite warm-up sequence. And it is a way to start to with a real intention to like helping coax people into a group setting slowly and carefully, how to get a group started at a workshop or a conference or a new team that you're pulling together. And it just involves a series of 3 different warm-up activities that happen in a particular sequence. One involves telling someone the story of your name. One involves talking about the skills that you would bring to the team in the event of a zombie apocalypse, which sounds really silly, but actually it's a way to just get people talking about something they know how to do that's outside of the professional realm. And if you're working together in an organization, often the only things you know about the person who's sitting next to you, in the
They're a
cube
good
or
accountant.
right, exactly. But that person is a whole interesting person, right? They've got other stuff going on in their lives. And if you have a way to kind of connect to that and bring that out a little bit, that can be really important in any kind of creative work. And then the third layer is you get to a much deeper question, which is about how are you seen and how do you want to be known? And that kind of gets into territory that can be very personal about, hey, this is the legacy I want to leave, or, this is where I'm trying to get to in my career. And here's why that's important to me. And if you can tap into those deeper levels, then all of a sudden you're building that kind of community that can go together into the unknown, into the new product development stage, into the work that is required when you're tackling something that is a foggy, kind of messy problem.
Newsflash, everybody. Kevin is going to do that exercise on Wednesday. We'll report back perhaps on how well it goes, but I'm going to have a group together on Wednesday and I'm going to use that exercise, Sarah. And again, not planned. I didn't know which one she was going to pick. So here's the other area that you didn't mention as one of the pathway areas that I think right now, so many of us as leaders, as humans, need to work on. And so she's opening the book, wondering where I'm going. In the area of slow down and focus, pick one there that you think people might find valuable or useful.
Okay. I'm gonna give the one that I think might be the most important, but also perhaps the one that people think, oh, that one's not for me. And I think it's related to what you just said, which is slowing down and finding focus in the kind of cultural moment that we're in has never been more difficult, right? We are all trained to just like, we're standing in line, we pick out our phone, we pick up our phones, we get just totally sucked in, right? And I think that the ability to clear your mind and think about the broader context is something that we have to now intentionally practice because we don't actually have that just emerging naturally. So let me tell you about the exercise called Tether. Now, Tether.
I wondered if this is where you were going to go. By the way, I think everybody, this one would be, I mean, it's simple, but I think this be hard. Just saying.
It is hard. It is hard, but it's so rewarding. So Tether is an assignment in which you pick a spot. It could be in a very busy place like a mall or a museum or, your town square. It could be in a emptier place or something you perceive as being emptier or slower. But you sit in one spot for 3 hours and you take notes the whole time about what you're seeing and observing. And what's really interesting is that in that first 20, 30 minutes, your mind is going to be buzzing. You're going to see, you're going to capture. Then you're going to hit a wall of boredom. And you're going to be so tempted to pick up your phone. And you're going to be so tempted to want to, kind of move around or change your point of view. And if you get through that stage, then you start to notice a whole nother layer of detail. You might think about relationships between people in the setting. You might start to imagine, wow, what happened here last week or last year or 1,000 years ago? What's going to be happening in this place 1,000 years into the future? And you start to actually broaden your perspective on what you're learning about that ecosystem. You might think about what are the laws and the policies that made the environment that I'm in right now possible or happening. You might be thinking about just a whole wide range of issues that unless you're forcing yourself to slow down and have that kind of patience, you just never would have gotten to. So Tether is one of those, it's kind of an advanced activity. I think not because it's difficult directions, but because it is about allowing yourself to exist in this different space. And I just can't stress how important that is, that we take the initiative to create those kinds of spaces for ourselves at this particular moment in time. It's not gonna happen by accident.
So I'm gonna make another observation, and this isn't in any way to downplay the value of that exercise, but to do something else that we could do that most of us don't do, but and that is, the next time you're driving any distance, don't turn on the radio. Don't turn on the next podcast. Just drive in quiet. Now, it's not the same as what Sarah is saying, but it gets us to some of the same things, and it gets us to slowing down, listening to ourselves, not just needing something else. And I'm just going to throw that in. It's not in the book. It's number 82.
I love that suggestion. I think that's brave coming from somebody who hosts a podcast to say don't turn on your playlist. But I really agree. And I found myself, if I have like a really thorny problem, that is exactly what I do. I turn off the radio and I just let the silence around me help my brain like work out the problem. And I come up with like a lot of my most creative ideas on those drives when I'm not listening to anything.
I've asked hundreds of people when they find to get their best ideas, and the number one answer is always in the shower, which is why I told my wife I wanted a whiteboard in the shower, and she denied that 100%. But one of the other places that I've heard, I mean, on the walk, in the gym, but only if you don't have all the other stuff going on the lawnmower or for pushing the lawnmower, same thing. And so I think that's really useful. And now I want to share quickly, everybody, one of my favorite exercises in the book, and then we're going to start to move into the home stretch here. In fact, we need to. I'm looking at the time. There's an exercise called I Like, I Wish. I'm not going to say much more about it other than if you've ever done something after a meeting called Plus Delta, it's very similar, only it's really, in some ways, it's exactly the same thing, and in other ways, it's very different, extremely powerful. And it's the idea of thinking about, we just went through an experience. What did I like? What did we like? And what do we wish? And it gets at, it's a way for us to give each other feedback. It's a way to debrief. It really is, because I haven't done it exactly, but I've done things very similar to it. I know how powerful it is, and I love that it's in the book. So everybody, by the way, any one of those 4 things you just heard are reason enough to buy the book. And if any of those are enough to say, I need all the details on that, then you ought to go get the book, because then there's 80 more that you want to get, Creative Acts for Curious People. I have a question for the designer in the house, Sarah, and it's about where we're at right now. And so, this probably could have framed the whole show, but we don't have time. But I want to ask you anyway. What are you and those at D School thinking about new designs for work and workplaces?
What a wonderful question.
Are you thinking about that, or have you personally thought about that, and sort of what are your thoughts about that idea?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I'll share is that we learned an enormous amount in the past 18 months that I don't think we knew was out there to learn, because we have always been so focused on the kind of in-person learning experiences with our students in the same classroom on these interdisciplinary teams. And I think that, just like, for everyone who is very attached and focused on getting good at one particular model, that means you're kind of not totally aware of what's happening, in the rest of the world. Now we have 2 teams that already had really good experience teaching and creating communities that were either hybrid or fully distributed. And those 2 teams, there's one team that teaches a cross-cultural design class with students who are both at Stanford and then at some university elsewhere in the world, and a team that runs a program called our University Innovation Fellows program that works with students and faculty at schools all over the world. And both of those teams kind of like leapt to the rescue of the rest of us to really help us understand, not only are there ways to kind of survive in this new hybrid online world, but actually there are some ways in which we see very potent learning outcomes and really good design work because teams are distributed. So just for one example, one of our, several of our workshops that we do for professional learners, for adults, we now do, instead of doing over like a 6-day intensive sprint on campus, we'll stretch it over 4 to 6 weeks. And in between the kind of course sessions, You are experimenting. You are coming up with new ideas. You are trying it out. You are trying those low resolution prototypes. You're getting real feedback. And then when you meet back with the rest of the group, you've advanced your project. You've advanced your work. And so you're able to actually get much further in some cases than you would have if you got, if you just did the course completely removed from your own reality at Stanford.
There's no way that you could replicate that in 6 days in a row, right? It's not possible.
Right. That's right. And so what I think we're going to be really thinking about is what did we learn in this experience of having, a very different set of work norms forced on us. And that is that you could abstract that principle and just think about what are all of the things that your team or your organization did better under these circumstances, if any. Or where you started to see glimmers of, this could help us make decisions in a different way, in a more participatory way. This could help us be more transparent as leaders because we're documenting everything and we're putting it in Slack or we're writing it down in a way that we used to just, speak out loud at a staff meeting.
Right.
And I think that really thinking about what were some of those shifts that allowed us to develop and have to try new behaviors, and which of those do we want to now design for, even if, again, we're going to go back into perhaps a more in-person format, what are those things we actually want to hold on to? So that's what we've been thinking about a lot is what did we learn? What do we want to hold on to? And now what new form does that practice need to take now that we're in more hybrid, or perhaps that we're, in our case, we're starting to come back to campus and be more in person, but not entirely. We're in a new phase and a new zone of how the organization is working. So that's I would say how we're really thinking about it.
Perfect. I love that. Thank you, Sarah. 3 more questions for you. We've shifted into the final segment, Sarah. Here's the first one. What do you do for fun, Sarah?
I love scuba diving. And I have not been able to dive since the early days of 2020. And I absolutely love the experience of being, sort of like in the ocean. That's always good. But particularly in a environment in which you're seeing these incredibly beautiful fish or dolphins or whatever, corals, whatever you're seeing. And I take a lot of photographs. Both under the water and out, in terrestrial environments. So I've been making do with more like bird photography and topside nature photography when I can't dive. But diving is like my real passion.
All right. Second to the last question. What are you reading these days?
I have been reading a book called System Error, which I have right here, where big tech went wrong and how we can reboot. It was written by a couple of my colleagues at Stanford. And I think this is a fantastic read for anybody who is a maker of technology, a producer of technology, or a user of technology.
Well, that's pretty much everybody.
Yeah, it is pretty much everybody. I mean, I think this book wrestles with some really interesting and important concepts about, how are we going to navigate this modern era that we're in around privacy, around data, around AI. But it's also written kind of with tons of behind the scenes stories about how certain things came to be in Silicon Valley. And I found it really, even though I live here and I think I kind of know what's going on, I found it really, really useful and interesting.
Perfect. Now the question you wanted me to ask the most from the very beginning, Sarah. How can we learn more about you and your work? How do people connect with you? Where do they get the book? I'm just going to hold the book up while you talk.
So you can get the book at dschoolbooks.com. And we have this one, which is out now, but then we'll have a whole series of books coming out starting in the spring on other related creative topics. So I recommend you check that out. I'm on LinkedIn and on Instagram. Stein Greenberg is where you can find me personally. And of course, if you want to learn more about the D-School overall, it's just dschool.stanford.edu.
Now a question. Thank you, Sarah, for that. Before we finish, question now for all of you who are listening or watching, and that is, now what? What are you going to do with this? Maybe there's an exercise that you just heard, an assignment, if you will, that you just heard that you want to say, I want to try that. Maybe you want to think about, what do I need to do to de-risk? Maybe you got an idea to think about this idea of low resolution starting point to help me de-risk or to move forward. What is it that you take from the last 40 minutes that can add value for you? Because if all you did was enjoy the witty repartee between Sarah and I, well, that was it was enjoyable, hopefully, but there's a lot more that both of us hope that you would get, and that is to take some action to help you become more creative, to help you become more curious, to help you lead in new ways. Sarah, thanks so much for being here. It was such a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure. It was so great to chat with you, Kevin.
Before we go, everybody, again, this episode was brought to you by Remarkable Master Classes. And each month, it's a new skill as a master class designed to help you become the leader and human you were born to be. You can learn more at remarkablemasterclass.com. And no big surprise, we'll be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.